with Russia, which is how this war should be ended. Let me stop there on Ukraine and turn to Gaza. The war in Gaza is also a long story. It's a long story of Western domination over the Arab people in the Middle East. It goes back at least to 1918, to the Versailles Treaty, because when World War I ended, Britain and France became the imperial powers in the Middle East to replace the Turkish Ottoman Empire, which was defeated in World War I. The British were very cynical imperial, it was a very cynical imperial power. I would say most of the problems in the world today have British roots to them because the British Empire made a lot of damage, also in Asia, by the way, in the Middle East, in Africa. And this is because Britain was the dominant power of the 19th century, like the United States was after World War II. And Britain made a lot of damage. In the Middle East, Britain took control over a lot of the Ottoman lands, including the province of Palestine, which was a part of the Ottoman Empire. And starting with the Versailles Treaty, Britain had a mandate, so-called, under the new League of Nations to control Palestine. And in that context, Britain established a so-called homeland for Jews to migrate to Palestine. At the time, the Jews were a tiny proportion of the population, maybe 3% or maybe 5%. And the Arabs were 85% Muslim Arabs. But Britain began a process of bringing in Jews, especially from the Soviet Union or from Russia and from Eastern Europe. And this created conflict between the established Arab population and the incoming Jewish population. So the roots of the war in the Middle East started already 100 years ago. The Arab people said, this is our land. The Jewish people said, no, this is our ancient land. And two peoples fought over this land. The basic approach of the so-called Zionist movement, which was a Jewish and Christian movement, was to dominate the Arab peoples with a Jewish state. And this emerged after World War II with the State of Israel. It was also justified by the European destruction of Jews under Hitler in World War II, in the Holocaust. But from the Arab point of view, that was not their doing. And so the Arabs rejected the idea that the European powers and the United States should create a new Jewish state in what was land controlled for centuries by Arab Palestinian people. And Israel got its independence in 1948 when it declared unilateral independence and defeated Arab nations that objected to its unilateral declaration of independence. There's a very long story, which we don't have time to consider at length. But just to say, the Zionist movement, which was the movement to create a state of Israel, always had the objective to dominate the region. And it never had the objective to share the region. And to this day, there are two peoples, Muslim Arabs and Jewish people, who have the same land or the same area, and there is only one state, the State of Israel, and the Palestinians live under the domination of that state. And that's why Israel has been called an apartheid state, like South Africa was. that one group dominates the other group. In my opinion, this is a fair description, an honest description, because the Arab Palestinian people are heavily discriminated against and abused and have no political rights because of the force of the state of Israel. So there has been since 1947, and then again after a six-day war in 1967, the call under international law for there to be two states side by side, the state of Israel and next to it the state of Palestine. The problem today is that the state of Israel refuses to allow a state of Palestine. And this is the deep problem, which is that there is no compromise on the Israeli side. All they want to do is to dominate. They say we'll never be safe if there's a state of Palestine, even though they don't try to negotiate their safety. And they say, for many of the Israel leaders, that God gave us this land 2,500 years ago, so we don't have to compromise. And that is the view of Israel. Now, this is an extremist view, in my opinion. It leads to continued war because 8 million Jews dominate 8 million Palestinians. And many of these leaders in Israel want to expel the Arab population or kill the Arab population or simply dominate the Arab population through political control and apartheid rule. In my view, it is very cruel and very, very inappropriate and against international law. Almost all the world agrees that Israel is acting illegally and very violently. But one country defends Israel, and that is the United States. The U.S. vetoed a state of Palestine when it came to a vote in the UN Security Council. It blocked Palestine's membership in the UN in 2011, and then it came up for a vote again in 2024, and there was a vote of 12 in favor in the UN Security Council, one veto, the United States, and 2 abstentions. So Palestine would have become a state, but the United States blocked the state. This is the drama that's underway right now. The Israeli government rejects the idea of a state of Palestine. That rejection is illegal, and it is cruel, and it is immoral, in my view, because it means domination or murder or ethnic cleansing of expelling the people of Palestine. The only just solution is 2 states living side by side. More than 180 countries out of the 193 in the United Nations support the 2-state solution. The United States is the only obstacle, in my opinion, to implementing the 2-state solution. Of course, Israel objects, but it could not stop the rest of the world from admitting Palestine as the 194th UN member state, because Israel has no veto. But the United States does have a veto, and it uses that veto to defend Israel's apartheid rule. So this is why this war continues and it's so violent, the lack of compromise. Let me finally turn to the question briefly of Japan and East Asia. Well, of course, you know the situation very well, so I don't have to talk about the history from 1945 onward. But the United States originally in 1945 occupied Japan after Japan's defeat in World War II. And then it defended Japan against the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union ended in 1991, and the threat definitely diminished or was eliminated. Of course, Russia and Japan had some minor territorial disagreements. They are minor, but they are real. But they are not a cause of war, and they are not a threat to Japan's security. What has changed, of course, is the rise of China. The rise of China is the real factor at play in East Asia during the last 25 years. China did what Japan accomplished. Japan first industrialized starting in 1868 with the Meiji Restoration, and Japan became the first industrial power of East Asia already in the 1880s. We know that China lagged behind, and China, instead of the kind of remarkable transformation that Japan achieved, instead fell into turmoil in the first decades of the 20th century. That turmoil was due to revolution. It was due to Japan's invasion of China. It was due to many factors. But China did not have the kind of smooth economic, or not smooth, but the rapid, impressive economic development that Japan accomplished during the Meiji Restoration and onward. Well, after 1945, after Japan's defeat, China, of course, was an impoverished country. And between 1945 and 1949, it had a civil war, which, of course, the Communist Party won and established the People's Republic of China in 1949. And between 1949 and 1979, China had a lot of turmoil. It had the Maoist period of Soviet-style economy in the 1950s. It had the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s. And it was only in 1978, with the coming to power of Deng Xiaoping, that China began the kind of rapid economic growth that Japan had invented. And Japan has done it twice. First, from 1868 in the Meiji Restoration, and then second after World War II, from 1955 onward, with the so-called decade of income doubling, the Ikeda period, the very rapid growth. Japan showed the world how to grow at very, very fast rates. And Japan's model became the model for Taiwan, for Korea, for Hong Kong, for Singapore, and starting around 1978 for mainland China. And so Japan showed the way how to achieve rapid growth. Japan should take some pride in watching China's rapid development, because it is based institutionally on a lot of the ideas that Japan developed and demonstrated over the period from 1868 onward. China has now become the world's largest economy, measured at international prices. Here is the basic question for Japan. Is China an enemy of Japan? In my view, the answer is surely no. China has never been an enemy of Japan. Japan has been an enemy of China at various times, but China has never attacked Japan, actually, which is very interesting. For 2,000 years, I don't think there is a single instance of China attacking Japan. And I think this is worth us reflecting on quite seriously. There are two invasions of Japan attempted that came from China, but these were not Chinese invasions. These were Mongol invasions in the year 1274 and in the year 1281. And on both of these occasions, the kamikaze wind saved Japan. The great kamikaze wind, the typhoons of 1274 and 1281, and the coastal defenses of Japan saved Japan from the Mongol invasions. But these were not invasions by China. After 1281, China never again attempted to invade Japan. This is very impressive and very interesting history. Never for centuries and centuries did China try to invade Japan, even though China was the dominant power. It was technologically dominant. It was demographically dominant. It was economically and militarily dominant, but it never tried to invade Japan. Actually, in 1592, Japan once again tried to invade China. This, of course, was Hideyoshi Toyotomi in 1592 when he was Kampaku. And he tried to invade China by first invading Korea in 1592. That failed. And then in 1597, he tried again, and that failed. And in 1598, Hideyoshi died. And that was the end of Japan's attempt to invade China. But after that, during the Ming and the Qing dynasties, China never tried to invade Japan. The next battle between the two countries was 1894, and that was Japan invading China, not the other way around. This is when Japan occupied Korea, and then the Sino-Japanese War took place, and Japan became the imperial owner of both Taiwan and Korea in 1895. So this, again, was not China threatening Japan. It was the other way around. In the early 20th century, Japan, of course, invaded China several times, including Manchukuo and then the mainland of China in the 1930s. I mention all of this because the long history of China and Japan is actually peaceful, except for short periods, which were not China's threats to Japan. And I believe that China and Japan are natural friends and allies. This is my own view. Of course, this is quite unpopular in the United States, and it's quite unpopular in Japan's political leadership right now, which says we need the United States to defend us against China. I think this is a big mistake. In my view, if China, Japan, and Korea got together peacefully and said, we have no problems with each other. We have a shared cultural heritage. We have 2,000 years of history together. We are not enemies of each other. We are all facing common problems, and we are all highly innovative economies. The three countries together would form the most powerful economic grouping in the whole world and could provide solutions not only for the people of Northeast Asia, but for the whole world. Imagine if China, Japan, and Korea were cooperating with each other. The robotics, the artificial intelligence, the solutions for aging population, the cleaning of the economy, the greening of the economy, the digital revolution. This would be the natural way for Northeast Asia to develop. Of course, the United States is against it, strangely. Why? Because what's the role of the United States if China, Japan, and Korea cooperate with each other? Then the United States isn't needed. And in fact, without question, China, Japan, and Korea would outcompete the United States. So the United States does not want that to happen. But I believe that this is the right approach. I don't think Japan needs the United States to defend itself against China, nor do I think that the United States really provides security for Japan. The presence of the United States is more likely to lead to war than it is to lead to peace. Of course, there are important issues like Taiwan. in my opinion, the biggest risk to Taiwan is not China, but the United States. Because if the United States continues to arm Taiwan, and then someday Taiwan declares independence, there will be war, even terrible war. So the main thing we should be doing is saying to Taiwan, do not declare independence. And the main thing we should be saying to China is, do not take military action against Taiwan. And the main thing we should be saying to the United States is, do not arm Taiwan, because that's a provocation, just like arming Ukraine was a provocation. So if the major powers would step back from each other, Taiwan could live in peace. Not independence, but peace. And this is the right strategy for Northeast Asia. Peace, tolerance, and avoiding any kind of military conflict. And in my view, the United States is not a help to that. It is a danger to that, actually. So this is just a brief thought that I'd like to put on the table. I know it's not the mainstream idea. It is somewhat controversial, but I'm a big believer in peace in East Asia. I know that from 1368 until 1839, 1368 being the beginning of the Ming Dynasty in China, 1839 being the arrival of the British in the First Opium War. Between 1368 and 1839, there was essentially no war in East Asia. As long as the Western world was outside, East Asia was able to live in harmony, with almost no exceptions, only with the exception of Hideyoshi, who was a little bit not very very smart in attempting to conquer China. But other than that, you live in a peaceful regime, a peaceful region of the world, and it could remain peaceful, and that's what I would recommend. So thank you very, very much for letting me share these thoughts with you.